I know. All right, guys, we got a short amount of time today. We got a lot to go in full committee, so we're going to try to get started real quick. I'm going to say a quick prayer. I know that Spencer Fry will not be here. Brett Harrell will not be here. Neither will Scoggins. So it may be me and Miss Pat, which is a shame. Danny Mathis should be coming in, I hope. So if everybody bow your head. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this time and this important matters that we talk about here in this committee, Father. And we just ask that you bless it, allow us to be cordial to each other, but learn the information that's important to move this good for all Georgians. In your son's name we pray. Amen. All right. Representative Rick Williams, House Bill 190. Give me 1 sec. I'm not the best at this yet.
1, 2.
You there?
I'm there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you and Ms. Pat for being here to hear us present our bill today. I bring before you House Bill 190, working off LC 411761. Is that what all of you have? Okay, great. Thank you. Come before you to bring a bill that has to do first and foremost with public safety, the safety of our citizens in the state of Georgia. I'm sorry, my phone rang and it goes through my hearing aids, and so I'm getting used to this newfound technology. So good. Now, thank you.
Well, it's a good thing there's two of you there. So.
That's right. You're exactly right. You know, as you mentioned that, I don't know that I would ever get on an airplane that didn't have a co-pilot. You know, there's a reason they put co-pilots on jet airplanes. And that's what we want to talk about today. And I'm sure you've already read the bill. If you need me to go over it, I will. But we also have put together a packet with more information that's been passed out to you. And what we see is a public safety issue, Mr. Chairman, that, and what this bill is actually saying is that we want AEDs in the engine, in the locomotive. Now, this could be carried by the engineer. You know, apparently it's apparent that all trains are not running at the same time. And it's apparent all jets are not flying at the same time. So as engineers climb into the engine, they could have this AED with them. You know, I've heard questions, well, this could interfere with some of the satellites, some of the train tracking and other devices. No, this is just a battery pack. It doesn't emit any kind of, the only time you're going to hear it emit anything is when it's bam, bam, being in use. Other than that, it's just a battery pack. The other issue here is to have two individuals, as I've already alluded to, on this train. You know, trains are getting longer. And I have some experts here, some engineers, some conductors, and I know there's railroad people here. Trains are getting longer. And as they're starting to open this port down in Savannah, I am sure that the trains are now 2 miles long, are going to become maybe 3 miles long. As that train is coming up the tracks, leaving the port, coming through some small towns, such as my hometown, Milledgeville, that does not have an overhead pass to get over the railroad tracks. If this train were to have a mechanical failure, and if it's a one-person train, and the engineer has to stop the train, try to lock the brakes, he gets out of the engine, and if the mechanical failure is almost at the end, he's going to have to walk 3 miles to get to the end of that train, try to make a repair. And where if there was two people, that second person could just get on the train, then radio the engineer, start moving. But that's not going to be the case. The case is going to be that he's going to have to walk back 3 miles to get into the engine and to get it going to go and start off. You know, my background is very varied. And when I was 14 years old, I started riding an ambulance with my father. This is when funeral homes ran ambulance service. Nobody else did in the community. Mr. Mathis can attest to that. I know he grew up like I did. But in Milledgeville, they were building Rheem Manufacturing in 1977. As they were building that factory to make water heaters, air conditioners, there was an accident at the scene, and they called us for an ambulance. So myself and one other attendant got in the ambulance with our red lights going, our sirens going. And there happens to be the railroad tracks right beside where they're building Rheem, so they have rail access. But also on that track is the coal train that went to Plant Branch, and it happened to be stopped that day. I could not cross the tracks. I had to go back into town and around to get to that person who was injured. What that's also saying is if that 3-mile train that I mentioned earlier is stopped and they're waiting on someone to get it fixed and get it back moving so they can get back going after he's walked 6 miles. What happens if there is an emergency in some of these small towns? It's public safety. This is black and white. That ambulance couldn't get across. They don't have an overhead pass. The police couldn't get around. The sheriff couldn't get around. The fire truck couldn't get around. So this is what I'm going after. This is a public safety issue. I love trains. I had them when I was a little boy. Some of my best friends are train fanatics. They have layouts in their house as big as this room. I love trains. It's not anti-train. This is public safety for my family, your family, anyone's family. Have Matt with the train, or maybe I can stop and see if there's any questions that you have at this point.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask for. I was going to say if anybody had any questions of Representative Williams.
A trained engineer, having been trained as a trained engineer, I think at least a virtual trained engineer, I've never imagined that I would want to be doing that by myself, but I too love trains. And this is not a rural problem. It's also a problem very much in the city of Atlanta, which I represent. I mean, one of the biggest issues we have when we have a grade level train tracks is that the trains are so long that the crossings, and they sit there and people can't get to work, can't get to wherever they need to, kids can't get to school because there isn't anybody to separate the trains. So that's an issue that I'm really concerned about. And, we're all human beings. I don't know if all engineers are as old as I am, but, we have health issues and we just don't really want to have one person running a train. I mean, we're watching as we're trying to get the trucks off the road, which means we're going to have lots more freight coming through our city. And I think we need to consider safety first. The trucks, I mean, we're trying to get the trucks off the road because of safety. And I just don't see this as an attempt to create a job that isn't needed. In history, they talk about feather bedding when the unions first tried to keep people employed who didn't really have a job. I don't think that's the case with this bill. So I guess I don't have a question other than I just wanted to let people know that I think it's really important to have a team.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back in history, I think, and Matt here could answer probably better, but I think there were 5 people on that train. And they always had a caboose, and they had a conductor. And I think you're a conductor too, aren't you, Matt?
That's right, yes, sir.
And we have some engineers here, and I know some people signed up to speak. But, they went from 5 people on a train, and now they're down to 2 people on a train. So right now, 2 people are on a train, and that's the public safety issue that we're concerned about.
All right, in the interest of time, Matt, if you want to go ahead and present.
Yes, sir. I know we don't have a lot of time, and I don't come before you often, but there's some things you need to know. I'm going to just hit some highlights. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and hopefully add some credibility to what I have to tell you. Subcommittee Chairman Carpenter, members that are present, thank you for being here. I see Chairman Tanner over there also. I'm glad he is here because this issue is important. This issue doesn't just affect railroad workers or workers in general. It affects the state. It's an issue of public safety. It's an issue that could save a life. I'm a railroad conductor by trade, 19 years seniority, starting in Savannah, Georgia. I worked thousands of miles across the Southeast. I've seen things that you would not believe. I serve today as a Georgia Legislative Director for SMART Transportation Division, which is a labor organization which represents thousands of railroad workers and retirees, thousands in the state, and many, many more across the country. In addition to lobbying, when I'm not here, I'm an appointed member of the Association of American Railroad Safety Appliance Task Force. What that is a group of a think tank where you have people from railroad companies, ergonomics experts, rail car manufacturers, when we look at ways to make the equipment safer for employees and customers. When a tank car or a box car goes into a chip mill or a facility to be loaded, you have people climbing all over it. It needs to be safe. I've been around that stuff. I've seen accidents. Another thing that I do that adds to my insight into rail safety and the importance of it and how dangerous it can be is I'm a member of the NTSB National Transportation Safety Board investigative team. Just this December, I was in Estill, South Carolina, where a CSX freight train crew from Savannah, Georgia, ran over a welder who was welding in the track. During the legislative session last year, during February, I was called from the session, missed about 10 days because I was in Casey, South Carolina, a suburb of Columbia, where an Amtrak train and a CSX freight train had a head-on collision, killed 2 people, injured 100-something passengers, did millions of dollars of damage. One of the crew members on Amtrak, the engineer, was one of our own. He lived in Richmond Hill, Georgia. I actually trained him in 2002 as a conductor on CSX. I knew him personally, and I had to go dig through the rubble of what was behind after this preventable collision happened. So when I talk about safety, you hear all this other side stuff coming in. I'm coming at you from personal experience. It's real to me, and especially when something is preventable. HB 190 is a preventative measure. It can, and the state should enact it to avoid a tragedy. It could save a life. It's really simple. It's common sense. That's what I've heard from 90% of the people I talk to. Well, I thought there was 5 people on the train. 4? There's only 2 people up there and they want to go to 1? Are you crazy? Well, no, but that's the reality of it. And so you need to know. There's 2 people up there. 1 person can't do the job. There's no technology out there today that can do the job of both of those people maybe 100 years from now, but we're talking about 2019, 2025, 2030. It's not there. Another thing HB 190 would do was put an AED in the locomotive cab. When you operate a train, you're in a mobile workplace. You're not working near a shop. You're going from A to B. You might be going from Savannah, Georgia to Waycross, Georgia, through a swamp, through a farm. There's nobody around you, no way for a car or an ambulance to get to you. If something happens to your coworker, you're dead. Period. A $500 AED doesn't seem like a big ask. especially when all this other money can be invested in cameras to watch every move we make. You can't spend $500 to put a piece of equipment that might save my life. It really doesn't make sense to me why anybody would contest that. They're in every office building. The other thing is about the two-person crew and whether states should regulate it or not. Despite what you might have heard, mistruths that have been told, states have explicit authority to regulate railroad safety and have done so on multiple occasions to cover a variety of shortfalls left in federal code. The states of Arizona, Wisconsin, West Virginia, California all have train crew size laws that no less than a minimum of 2. Some as far back as 1992, 27 years. No veto, no override. That's been the law of the land for 27 years. Just this week in Colorado, similar legislation as this passed, both chambers. It's sitting on the governor's desk, and he is expected to sign it because while he was in Congress, he was an advocate for public safety. And he's committed to signing this legislation. So that's 5 states it's already law. You know, Georgia has the power to fill the gap, and it's been stated case after case where federal law does not cover. If federal law later on down the road comes up with a law, a train crew size law, as they did in Canada after 47 people were killed with a crude oil train because it was operated by one person, if they decide to do that, which they should, but they haven't yet, if they decide to do that, then at that time, that can override state law. But they haven't done it yet, and they're not doing it tomorrow. Georgia needs to act today. Another mistruth about this bill is that it's a labor bill. Let's clear that up. Yes, thousands of railroad workers like myself who work in the industry day and night, who know the industry like nobody else, who live it, breathe it, depend on it, who drive ungodly amounts of chemicals through your backyard. Yes, we support it. So I guess that makes it a labor bill. But who also supports it are policemen and EMS and anybody really that you talk to really supports it, except for the people who would have to pay a little bit extra money to keep one job on, a job that has plenty of duties. It's not just a passenger. It's a threat to the safety of our citizens, and honestly, to me, it's a slap in the face that a railroad would even consider running trains that are miles long, carrying millions of tons of explosive, destructive chemicals through your town with only one person on board. You know, block crossings, fatigue. We work all hours of the night. We're always on call. Hazardous chemicals, train securement, national security. You know, national security is a threat. Think about when the trains come through downtown Atlanta under the Super Bowl. What could happen? When you have 4 eyes, you have 2 people alert, doing their job. They can see things that a satellite's not going to see. You know, I'm sure everybody in here has been blocked at a road crossing. However, whatever the length of time you've been blocked, whether it be 10 minutes or half an hour, you take that conductor or whatever person off that train, you can magnify that by 100. Because the engineer can't go back and manually separate that crossing. If he goes back there to go to the crossing, nobody's at the controls to move the locomotive. All he can do is radio in and wait for an over-the-road truck to come manually split that. And you know what really is troubling is it might, you know, it's bad enough being delayed to go to work or to school, but what if that's an ambulance? And you know, that sounds trivial. It really does. Until the person in that ambulance is a family member, and that's the direct route to the hospital. That's when this stuff hits home. And it's real, and it happens. The freight industry is growing. It's huge. It's amazing. I love the expansion of the Savannah port. I hope more freight comes. I buy stuff on Amazon 3 times a day. Bring it on. But with that, instead of more trains coming out of the Savannah port, which we have more, we're seeing stuff across the country where trains are getting longer. The longer a train is, for those that don't work in the industry, the longer the train is, the harder it is to operate. So when you take a train that's normally 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 feet, a little over a mile, you increase that to 2 miles. The longer a train is, the heavier it is, the harder it is to operate. The more they tear apart, the more the rear end device that replaced that caboose you talked about, there's a little electronic device, it communicates with the engine, the locomotive. The further away it is, like a walkie-talkie, it don't work. When it don't work, the train stops. You can't help where the train stops. It might be in a town with 4 crossings, and you've got them all blocked. You got one fella up there, all he can do is pray. Radio in and pray while that community suffers.
Can we ask for questions just for expedience? Are you cool with that?
I'd love to take questions, or I can talk till midnight.
All right, let's go to Pat at 22.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned that 5 or 6 states have had this bill for a long time. Has it ever been challenged by the federal?
No, ma'am. No,
There's been
ma'am.
no federal suits against, so it's not a question of.
Yes,
all
there
think-
was suits by the railroad companies in some of the states suing the state for enacting such law. However, it was shot down in court because states do have explicit authority to regulate rail safety.
Yeah, I think we've all grown up thinking the railroads could do whatever they wanted. I mean, under the federal law. So
In
that's-
your
that's
packet, ma'am, there's a letter from the author of the 1970 Railway Safety Act. He wrote the laws that we abide by in the country today, and it lists case after case where states can absolutely regulate rail safety.
Any more questions for Mr. Campbell before we move on to the rest of the speakers? Oh, we got one more, 25. Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was some incredibly compelling testimony. I appreciate you being here, telling me about the accident and giving us a good picture about what it's like. We don't really get a chance to hang out on railroads. I think I've gotten run off a couple times myself. In serious, do we have any sort of collision data or accident data related to this, to the industry itself around the state or in the southeast that we could look to?
Collision data is in your packet.
Okay.
There should be 6 tabs. I believe it'll be the 4th or 5th, and that's just crossing collision. That's from Operation Lifesaver, which is a group who educates, probably been in your schools and out of the country.
I got it.
In the packet with the plastic cover. In the country, Georgia ranked fifth at the last total, I believe, 2017 in collisions, out of 50 states, 5th. You'll hear an argument. I don't believe anybody from the railroad industry signed up to testify. I guess that's the way it is. But I'm here to talk because you need to know this stuff. If they ever do testify, you will hear. There's no data to support 2-person crews. Well, there is some data. There's no broad data because the majority of American railroads operate with 2 people. We've had a few operators operate with 1. One of those railroads is now bankrupt. It was a 1-person operator, and that should be in your packet too. This is a picture of the damage. They actually used the footage from this catastrophe in a new Netflix movie with Sandra Bullock called Bird Box, The Flames. Single operator. Like a truck driver, we can only work so long. So when his time was almost up, he had to park the train where he would not block road crossings. So it had to be parked on an incline on a hill. He got down. He tied the handbrakes what he could to think he secured the train. You can't test those brakes without 2 people. What normally happens is the conductor, I get down, I tie these manual safety brakes. Then I radio the engineer. He releases the air brakes. You see if the train rolls or not. If it rolls a little, you tie more brakes. You can't do that with 1 person. Long story short, he tied it down, went to the motel to lay over. Air compressor, due to a fire in the locomotive, was turned off. Air brakes bled off. Train rolled down the hill, killed 47 people, decimated the town. That's what a 1-person train crew will get you. We don't want this in Georgia.
Mr. Chair, I got a couple more. I wrote some down. Do you mind if I ask
Yeah,
them? real quick?
just move along. We
Let's
got
let's go.
a long day ahead of us.
We'll do a little shorter answer next time. What's the length of a train that's allowed?
There's no limit.
No limit to the length of a train.
We as in our organization and other railroad worker organizations have petitioned the FRA to regulate that, but they've yet to
Okay.
regulate that.
And then are there work or log requirements for the operators, like you're driving a truck where you got to have like an 8-hour logbook and then you have to sit out for 12 or whatever the code is?
We are federally certified conductors and engineers. You can work no longer than 12 hours, and then you have to have 10 hours mandatory rest.
Okay.
However, over the past several years, terminals have been closed, especially over the past 3 years. Terminals have been closed. So you had Tilford Yard in Atlanta, that's not there. And you had work directed at different places. But you have people that have lives and families in places such as, say, Savannah, Georgia, and the trains are directed at another terminal. So instead of driving 20 minutes to work, now you're driving 200 miles. That time you're in that car driving to work, from work, after working 12 hours overnight on a freight train, is not accumulated in that 10-hour rest. So during that 10 hours, you may drive 2 hours back to your home, wash your clothes, kiss your wife, read to your children, get 3 or 4 hours sleep, do it again. Fatigue is huge. It's a problem. Like I said, there's no set schedule, which is all the more important. Anybody you ask who works in a locomotive will tell you the number one thing that keeps them alert at 5 a.m. when they've been working all night is the dialogue with that other crew member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you
You
for
got
that
it. All right.
testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. We're going to go ahead and grab Patrick, Dwayne. Are you guys all together? Patrick Folsom, is that right?
That's right.
All right, Patrick, if you want to slide to that mic real quick. Guys, I hate to brush you, but like a minute at the most at this point. We're running out of time. I apologize.
I appreciate y'all giving me this time to speak to y'all. I'm a locomotive engineer. I work for Norfolk Southern. I do not have no complaints. I have a good job, but there is safety issues. And having two crews, being vigilant with two crew on a train is very important. For example, I myself drive 2.5 hours I'm also a county commissioner in Brooks County, so I took the oath to look at the safety of people. And it's very, compassionate of me that I want to show to y'all how important it is. But I drive 2.5 hours to work. I take a train from Macon, Georgia to Jacksonville, Florida. I lay over in a hotel. Sometimes I don't get really good rest because you're trying to sleep during daytime. You might get back on the train within a 10-hour period, and you're back out there at all times of the night. There's no set schedule. So when you have slow orders, and to y'all what slow orders are, if you have the Bumblebee Festival in a small little town where everybody's running around and you've got a 10-mile-an-hour slow order, it takes two people to say, hey, 2 miles ahead, 3 miles ahead, we've got slow order. You just need to slow down. But if you've got somebody that's fatigued and tired, it can be overlooked. And you go barreling through a town at 60 mile an hour when you have a 10-mile-an-hour slow order, it could get somebody hurt. That's what we're saying. It's a safety issue. We're not trying to, kick a bad can down the road. We're asking for help and for y'all to have the knowledge that y'all need to make a good decision. I appreciate the job that I have, but I also know the importance because I am an engineer. And a lot of people don't realize that it's not a 9-to-5 job. I'm getting called at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. You have 10 minutes to answer the phone. You got an hour and a half to get to work. You always got to be living on the go. And you also said the hours of service law is 12 hours. Sometimes we get stuck on a train waiting on a taxi cab to relieve us out in the middle of pine trees and palmetto bushes. And I've been on duty sometimes 15 hours waiting on a cab. And they call that limbo time when you get in a cab and you might have to drive 2 hours to your home terminal. So then when you only got 10 hours to get rest and you've been out there, on the road and at work 18, 20 hours, I don't know how many people, it's a hard life. But it's a good life with good money and good benefits. But a lot of times that's why people stay, because of the benefits, and they just try to work it out. But if y'all have any questions for me, I'll be glad to ask them.
I don't think so. I don't think we have any questions, but I appreciate you being here. And just for the record, I grew up, my stepfather worked for Norfolk Southern out of Chattanooga, so I'm familiar with the middle of the night calls. Thank you for being here. I know it's been a long day.
Thank you.
All right, real quick, Dwayne Massengill. And if you're too long, I'm going to blow the whistle at you.
Well, I won't go over what I had here, but
Don't do all that.
I'll just make it brief and
Campbell
short.
did a lot of coverage for you today. So yeah, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, members of the committee. Dwayne Massengale, 19 years experience as a locomotive engineer. I'm legislative chairman for the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. But safety That's why we're here, safety. We want to make railroads safer for our communities, safer for our workers. Safety is our number one issue. We can look at technology. The railroads have implemented new technology. Congress mandated the implementation of positive train control. And it's a great tool to have. It's a great complement to help us do our job. But it is not a replacement for a human being, for that human intervention that you have. And as a matter of fact, with the implementation of this new technology, it demands more of my focus being on this technology than my focus being on what lies ahead of me. That conductor is, that extra person on there is needed now more so than ever. That you included the picture in the package. There's a picture in your package that shows you. Now I'm watching 3 different screens. I'm having to focus on these screens. The screens throw up prompts that I'm having to answer. I'm having to focus on that. I'm having to focus on the radio with the dispatcher talking. I have to talk to the employee in charge of the workers that are out working on the track. I've got more on me now with the implementation of new technology than before. But like I said, it is a supplement. It's a great tool to have, but it's not a replacement for that person. That person is needed more so than ever. And now with that and our fatigue issues, just like you heard Matt and Patrick both state, I mean, say for instance, I get off a train today at 6 o'clock. I go home and get a good night's sleep. Well, I wake up tomorrow morning, my phone doesn't ring, but I'm wide awake because I slept all night. And then my phone doesn't ring all day. And then when it's time for me to go to bed, my phone's ringing to go to work. Well, now I'm tired and sleepy. You know what? That man over there is more important than me being up there by myself. I mean, it's important for him, like the conversation, just carrying on conversation to keep each other awake. And then, you know, I've went into work many times where I say, okay, you got your hands full tonight because I'm tired, I'm sleepy. You've got a tough job keeping me awake all night. And that's what it takes, and we're a team. And, you know, you don't want me coming through your town when I've been up all day and then I'm going to be working all night and I'm hauling 20,000 tons behind me and I've got chemicals back there. I've got chlorine that could wipe out, you know, a small town. In fact, 3 years ago, I was called for a train in Etowah, Tennessee. I ran from Manchester, Georgia to Etowah, Tennessee. And I was at the hotel in Etowah. I was called for a train. And when we got to work, we were notified that that train had derailed. And they had chlorine on the train. They had to evacuate 5,000 people in Maryville, Tennessee. I mean, that's what you're facing. I mean, this technology, it can stop a train, but it stops a train for pre-programmed locations. It doesn't stop a train for the unexpected. It doesn't stop a train for a propane truck that I can see if I'm on a straight track and I can stop my train. It doesn't stop for that. And if I'm paying attention to this technology and I don't have my conductor, then I may not see that propane truck up there, but that conductor's going to be able to see all this. I mean, there's so many reasons why this second person is needed on the train.
Give me 1 second. I got 16, Chairman Tanner.
Yes. I'm gonna have to cut our subcommittee chair off here in a minute with this hearing because we got a lot of bills to cover. But I think it's important, so I don't think we're going to be able to get to everyone that's
Right.
here to speak on in favor of the bill. But I do want to know a show of hands of folks who work with or for one of our railroads that would agree with the testimony that's been presented, just so we'll have an idea since some of you traveled to get here. So So everyone with their hand up's in favor of the legislation and work as conductor, engineer, something for the railroad. Is that correct? All right, thank you. Okay, and I'll support the legislation. All right. The reason I say that is that I think because we could keep repeating the same information. I think it's we understand your position, and I don't want to cut you off, but we do need to move along.
Right.
And keeping with that, Mr. Chairman, I would also ask that we have just one person. I believe, looking back, it looks like we have two people from the industry, so I would ask them to just have one from the industry speak on behalf of the industry. And again, try to keep that short so we can move along. I do want to give both sides an opportunity to be heard, but we'll just ask for one person from the industry only. So if you would, thank you again, and thank you all for coming, but we are going to have to move along. Thank you.
Thank you. We feel that safety is not negotiable. Safety is first and foremost with us.
All right, thank you very much. As somebody from the industry comes up, could I, of everybody that's in front of me, with a show of hands, how many of you guys have operated with one conductor on a train at this point in Georgia? Yeah, that's been on by themselves is what I'm asking you at this point. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Craig Camuso. I'm the Regional Vice President for State Government Affairs for CSX Railroad, which operates about 1,600 miles of track in the state of Georgia, and we have 1,900 employees here in the state. I was signed up to speak, by the way. I would like to, but before we get started, tell you a couple of things. Number one, I've never been on a train. These gentlemen have. These gentlemen are experts, and I commend you and thank you for the work that you do on behalf of our industry. These are hardworking guys, and there is not much more I can say about that other than they do a fantastic job moving America. And that's what the railroad industry does. They move America. I also want to thank Representative Williams for your willingness to talk with us. We've had a couple of conversations and have gone over and certainly understand and respect his intentions and his of this bill, which absolutely is safety. And I think one thing that you will get from both myself and the speakers prior to me is that we absolutely believe that safety is a way of life. Safety is the primary priority for the rail industry. We do have concerns with the bill, and I will, at the chairman's wishes, go quick. I have a lot to say, and I'm going to try to cut it down as much as I can. The bill certainly covers two issues, the requirement of an AED and, of course, a two-man crew. The Federal Railroad Administration has occupied the field as to what it believes needs to be installed in the cab of a locomotive for the safety of that crew, and it's pretty detailed. As a matter of fact, if you look in part under safety requirements, then this is just an example. They have a code on protection against personal injury, exhaust and battery gases, general conditions, cab, floors, and passageways, locomotive cab noise, as well as sanitation. All these above regulations apply to the cab of the locomotive and are designed specifically for the safety of the crew. Now, as FRA has occupied this field with regard to crew safety, any attempt, we believe, by a state to impose an additional safety requirement in the cab of a locomotive, in this case an AED, would be preempted in that case by federal law. The AEDs, I'm not talking about the two-man crew, the AEDs. We believe, too, that this is an issue that if those that advocate for the bill feel strongly enough on this, what they perceive to be a gap in safety, then they can go through the rulemaking process of the Federal Railroad Administration, where a proper cost-benefit analysis and a proper safety analysis can be conducted. In addition, they talk about the claims have been made that AEDs are necessary because locomotives are mobile workplaces in which train crews spend many hours of the day, which they do, away from any road and always in areas impossible for emergency services to reach in a timely manner. In essence, they're really not much different from the cab of an over-the-road truck. And OSHA, which regulates the trucking industry, and I've confirmed this with the head of the Motor Trucking Association today, has no requirement that trucks carry AEDs. None. And there's really no comparable industries where such of an AED requirement exists. Now, with regard to two-man crews. I am not going to sit here and I will tell you this, and you just asked the question. We operate in 23 states, as does Norfolk Southern, and nowhere currently are there one-man crews operating. Nowhere. Freight rail, however, but I'm not going to sit here today and tell you that that's not something that hasn't been considered or won't be considered in the future. I remember when I worked in the textile industry and went through manufacturing facilities and saw all the great technology that was changing. My question then was, wow, what's going on? You don't see the people that you did see. And the reason these manufacturers did that, they could operate safer, they could operate more efficiently. But they did not do that until they were 100% convinced that the technology that is available would certainly provide those instances. So freight rails is a rapidly changing area. The gentleman spoke today about PTC, which is absolutely true. But we are not going to change any technology until we are convinced that it is 100% safe. That it's safe not only for our employees, but it's safe for the public, and it's safe for our customers. We are concerned that legislation that would restrict or prohibit that investment in what could be very innovative and impactful change in the industry could harm our attempts to provide a safer work environment. Automation is something that is rapidly, we've sat down here and I've been in hearings about us talking about autonomous trucks, autonomous vehicles. The railroad industry from a technology standpoint is really no different in looking at technology every day on how we can become safer. One thing that I've never been in the cab of a locomotive like these gentlemen. I can't speak. I've not witnessed some of the things that they have witnessed. I don't want to think about some of the things that you gentlemen have witnessed because it's, those things stay with you, and I certainly understand that. The Federal Railroad Administration, so I can't sit here and say the Federal Railroad Administration and the National Transportation Safety Board, and I'm going to just quote here. It says, "We cannot provide reliable or conclusive statistical data to suggest whether one-person crew operators are generally safer or less safe than multiple-person crew operations." That comes from the Federal Railroad Administration. The National Transportation Safety Board has said that based on our limited experience in this and other modes, we don't find that two-person train crews offer a safety benefit. Again, I said it once and I'll say it again, there's nowhere on CSX right now currently where one-man crews are operating. When we talk about what has happened to the industry over the last 40 or 50 years, and at one point we did have 5 men on a crew. Back in, I guess in the 80s, we transitioned from 5, then we transitioned to 4. 1990, we went down to a 3-man crew, and then in 2000, we went down to a 2-man crew. And we talk about safety because that's what we've been talking about today. So this is a chart that shows a 1,136% improvement in safety over that time. Again, I don't believe I can say that the railroad industry is not going to move forward with technology that could put anyone at harm, certainly our employees. We would not want to do that. With regard to bills that have passed in other states, in 2018, legislation did pass in the state of Maryland. It was vetoed by the governor. He wrote that this bill puts the Port of Baltimore, and we did talk about the ports a second ago, puts the Port of Baltimore, one of our state's major economic engines, at a competitive disadvantage with neighboring ports. Now he says only 2 states in the nation, both west of the Mississippi River, have a 2-person crew requirement. I know it was testified earlier that there were 5, and it might be, quoting right here. Freight rail is America's backbone of interstate commerce, mandating that carriers of the state of Maryland use a larger crew size that would be required of the same railroads operating out of Norfolk, Philadelphia, New York, and you could probably add Savannah, would directly result in an increase in shipping costs and deter carriers from operating in the state, resulting in the loss of jobs directly associated with the port. In 2017, the governor of Nevada vetoed similar legislation. Now, what he said, and I'm not going to disagree with what Mr. Campbell said about federal regulations here, but what he said was mandating crew sizes through state statute would interfere with negotiations between management and labor, and such interference is unnecessary and may be preempted by both the Federal Rail Safety Act and the Federal Railway Labor Act. Now, with regard to the accident that happened in Canada, and it was absolutely terrible, I want to talk about something that happened a few years ago out of this country, not on territory that is operated in either Norfolk Southern or CSX. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada conducted an investigation and found that identified 18 distinct causes and contributing factors to that accident, many of them influencing one another. This is their chart. They also concluded on page 8 of their report, says the TSB looked very carefully at a single-person train operations and whether having just one crew member played a role in the accident. After looking at the circumstances that night, the investigation was not able to conclude that having another crew member would have permitted the accident. So we can get into details. I lived the Maryville incident up in Tennessee a few years ago. I was up there for 6 days. Safety is a priority. It will remain a priority. I will not sit here and tell you today that we won't look at one-man crews in the future, but I will stand here today and tell you we absolutely will not until we are 120% convinced that it will provide safe passage for the freight, it will provide safe passage for the employees, and it will provide safe passage through the communities that we operate.
Thank you for your testimony. All right, guys, this was a hearing only. I appreciate you very much, everybody being here, and I apologize that we got cut short. It was a long day in the chamber, and we got a long afternoon in full committee. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope that hope you enjoyed everything you heard today. Thank you very much. Oh, yep, sorry, go ahead.
I just would like to know if there's a possibility of coming back before the subcommittee for a vote.
Me and Chairman Turner will get together on that this afternoon.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. And this subcommittee is now adjourned.
All right, we're going to go ahead and go right on into our full committee meeting. I welcome everyone here. We'll give everybody a few minutes to move out. Do it. All right, if I could get everyone to come to order, we're going to get started. If you've got conversations you need to continue, take them out in the hall, but we're going to get started. This time we're going to ask Danny, if he would, Representative Mathis, to lead us in a word of prayer. U-24? Go ahead.
Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this day. I ask you to be with this committee and the folks that are here with us, that we make good decisions, that we'll make things safe, that we'll do the things that are in your will. For in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
All right, thank you very much. We got a busy agenda ahead of us, but it's that time of session. We appreciate the subcommittee's work, and we had a long day in the chamber today. But we're going to go right in, and at this time we're going to have a hearing on House Bill 383. Representative Bonner, if you would, come on up to the table, and we will get started on House Bill 383. And just for the members, if you don't mind, when you get started, just read your LC number just to make sure we all have it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We're working off of LC 441060, House Bill 383. This is relating to the annual license fees for the operation of vehicles that are termed alternative fuel vehicles. Currently, there is an annual fee required on essentially a upgraded golf cart that is a $200 fee if you use it for non-commercial uses and a $300 annual registration if you use it for commercial purposes. These vehicles look like a golf cart. They act like a golf cart. They are driven on cart paths primarily. They are able to go a little faster than a golf cart. But what we are trying to do is we're requesting that these types of vehicles be added to, in the same category that we currently have, those alternative fuel vehicles that run on natural gas. So we are adding these two categories of essentially golf carts of low-speed vehicles or electric-powered personal transportation vehicles. So down in District 72, which is a portion of Peachtree City, we have over 90 miles worth of cart paths. And this is primarily for a lot of the citizens of Peachtree City, the primary mode to get in and around the city. And we have a little over 11,000 golf carts registered in Peachtree City. And of this type, this low-speed vehicle, there are several hundred of those that operate on our cart paths. So we are requesting in this bill to add these low-speed vehicles to the list of items that are not assessed this $200 and $300 annual fee. They are registered through the city and county and whatever jurisdiction they operate, and they have to pay a fee for that. And what we're doing is we're adding an additional $200 to $300 fee on top of that. At this time, Mr. Chairman, I'll entertain any questions.
All right, are there any questions? All right, Representative Prince.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Barnard, these vehicles, now who, do you have to be a licensed driver through DDS in order to operate these vehicles?
It depends on where you operate them. So, for instance, in Peachtree City, you can operate vehicles on the cart paths only at age 14, as early as age 14. If you're going to use these vehicles to drive on roadways that are, so for instance, the low-speed vehicle goes 20 to 25 miles per hour. That's kind of the category it falls in. So if you're going to be primarily driving in a downtown area that and not on a cart path, then that municipality may require that you be registered, a registered driver, just like any other vehicle.
All right, thank
All right, Chairman Hitchens.
They are driven on the public streets or highways, though.
They certainly could be, but within that mile per hour range. So that 20 to 25, for instance, that's primarily kind of your downtown areas. It is certainly possible.
And I'm not trying to be judgmental, but the reason that money was put in there was some of the vehicles that didn't use gasoline or diesel were not paying any fees when we did House Bill 170. So we thought if they used the public streets or highways and they traveled on them and they then required maintenance, that was how we would get their pro rata share.
Understand that, and so for instance, again, in the municipalities, so like Peachtree City that has this cart path system, which is considered a public highway, the fees that are generated from those annual registrations of whether it's a golf cart or any other vehicle, go towards the maintenance of that.
All right, any other questions? One question, Representative. Have you requested or do you have a physical note on this?
It's such a small number of vehicles impacted that it did not require a physical note. Okay. This bill actually this bill was presented last session, went through Ways and Means, and at that time did not require a physical note either.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you, Representative. Next, Next up, we're going to go on into House Bill 454. This is going to be a motorized scooter bill. I'm going to stay here. This is my bill and present it, but I'm going to ask GMA if they would come up to the table. Georgia Municipal Association has been working very closely with the industry on this bill, and I know we have representatives here from the industry, so I'm going to go through the legislation, and then I'm going to ask GMA if they have any further information they'd like to provide the committee, and then also invite the industry and anyone else here to speak on it. I will say that this is a hearing only today for this legislation. That we do know there's some changes that we'll talk about today that need to be made. Appreciate GMA and the industry continuing to work together to perfect the legislation, so when we bring this forward out of committee, we'll have a good consensus. Representative Jones, do you have a question before we move
Chair,
forward?
just out of clarification, are we going to be moving on any bills, or are we just going to be hearing all?
No,
bills?
we're going to be looking at moving House Bill 215. We actually have a sub. We're waiting they're going to print that today. All right. So moving on through the bill, again, the idea here is over the last 6 months to a year, throughout several of our cities in Georgia, we have saw scooters coming up across cities here in the Atlanta area, and it's been a very useful tool. Some cities have banned them altogether. Others have embraced that and created ordinances around it, and others haven't done anything. So the idea here from GMA and the industry both was to get some definitions in the law and develop some basic rules of the road from a state perspective. And I think we'll probably be doing a lot of that here in this committee over the next several years as technology continues to change and innovation continues to happen around these around mobility. But we'll go through the legislation. There's just several definitions here. We'll go to page 2, lines 45. This is the some of the keys that there's been a lot of conversation back and forth with the industry on. There's 2 specific types referenced in the legislation in front of you. One is a total weight less than 75 pounds. You can read the definition there, but that has 2 or 3 wheels. It's designed to transport one person, and it's capable of traveling no more than 20 miles an hour on a level paved surface. Now, we'll tell you the bill you have in front of you says traveling with or without human propulsion. One of the things the industry brought up, if they have a scooter that fits within that definition, it's running 19 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour on a level surface, and somebody puts their foot down, is kicking it and assisting it along, and it runs over 20 miles an hour, then that's not they can't stop that. And we agree with that, and I think GMA agrees with that. So when we bring forth a committee sub, the intent would be to strike with or there on line 48 and also on 52, so it would just read without human propulsion. And I think that's something that both GMA and the industry are good with. And then one of the things that's also been talked about, and again, going through this legislation with the committee so you have full understanding, one of the things brought up by the industry, technology is changing so rapidly that they wanted to be able to have the option of a letter C, which would be basically that if they created a new device, and that device may have 6 wheels or 7 wheels, or whatever the case might be, they're looking at devices that would be more stable for the elderly population. And if it doesn't fit neatly within A or B, then they can go to the city or the county and ask for express permission to use that vehicle in that city. So they cannot just start using it, but if the city allows them to do that after they show the city satisfied with it, and their council approves that, then they would be able to use that in the city. And again, I think GMA, and they'll be able to speak to this, is comfortable with that. So we're working on language around that in the substitute that you'll see at the first of next week. And then several of the sections here was just putting an operator and motorized mobility device on your next line, just again adding what we're talking about. And then the next substantive item is there around 111 through 118. Now, this is dealing with sidewalks, and you'll see a little bit in the bill where you can ride these vehicles under the rules of the road we're looking at adopting. But this is regulations around what you can and can't do on the sidewalk. we want to make sure that the pedestrian has the right of way on the sidewalk and that these devices are not interfering with pedestrian traffic on a sidewalk and controlling the speed. The maximum miles an hour that can be driven on a sidewalk would be 7 miles an hour. One of the things you'll see in the bill, and I think it's important to point this out, this bill allows cities to further restrict this activity, so it does not prohibit a city from saying we want to restrict this in a greater way. They can still do that in this legislation. This is just the basic rules of the road. Then 122 through 127, that's what I would call maybe the Good Samaritan clause. This is someone comes along, one of these devices is falling over, they pick it up, they stand it upright, then there's no liability on that person for doing that, because we know sometimes these things might get left in the wrong place, they might be in the road, they might be turned over on the sidewalk, people are having trouble getting by, so this is, I come along and I'm just trying to be a good citizen and I pick this up, then I'm not going to be liable for it. And then lines 136, 137, this deals with if there's an accident, giving information. There's also been some conversation, you may hear some testimony today about the unique identification number, vehicle identification number, and that wording that may need to be tweaked. So we'll hear that today, take that into consideration also. And then again, going on down, Section 8, again, talking about what type of information has to be provided. Again, this is just trying to get in basic rules of the road to match up to what we do with other vehicles. And 168 through 175 is talking about, all this section talking about if it's a hit and run, that type of thing. Again, this is all not reinventing the wheel, but this is matching up similar legislation or similar language in law already for other types of vehicles. All right, Section 9. One of the things that GMA did in developing this bill is talk about promulgating rules that the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety could do that. He's indicated to me that he would prefer not to get in the business of regulating or promulgating rules around these vehicles. So I know in our sub, that's something we've talked to GMA about, removing that, and this would just go around the basic rules that we're adopting here. All right, let's see. And then over on, we'll move along. If you have any questions, please stop me, but most of this is just adding in the term or motorized mobility device. But in Section 12, line 223, this is talking about that it's, you can only carry the number of people it's designed to carry. We have definitions that they're just one person. But we know, again, definition C will allow for some innovation in this area if the city agrees to it. But no matter what is allowed, it can only carry the number of people that it's designed to carry. Section 13 deals with parking and standing and parking, that these devices cannot be parked, they cannot be stood up, they cannot be left in all of these areas you see all the way through lines 252. These are locations that you can't leave them, you can't park them, you can't stand with them in it, you can't put them on railroad tracks, that type of thing. So again, if you have any questions, let me know. But all of this is, again, something similar to what we have from a bicycle perspective in the law, and it's been worked out with GMA in the industry. All right, I'm going to skip on over to 281 through 290. Again, this allows the cities to further restrict their use. Lines 281 through 283, you'll see subject to more restrictive rules established by local authority in order to protect public health, safety, and welfare. And it can be restricted in these areas that you see, lines 284 through 290. Also, it adds in that you cannot ride these two abreast there, 291 through 294, just like bicycles. And then skipping on over to lines 311, 317, this deals with the ADA. The ADA needs to be ADA compliant. They, again, not being able to block sidewalks to prevent people that may be able to freely move around. And again, if a local ordinance is adopted authorizing these, again, it's both stop or stand or park on sidewalks within its jurisdiction, they are able to do that. And then 324 is two hands. You have to, you cannot carry a bag or anything else while you're operating one of these vehicles that would prohibit you from keeping both hands on the steering wheel at all times. And then 362 through 366 deals with having the name. They have to have their name, the company name, on the vehicle. And again, we have here, and this is a section I think that refers to vehicle identification number in line 365 that somebody brought up, which I believe may have been the bicycle industry. So that's something we need to take a look at as we move forward today. And 376, lines 376, this deals with if someone intentionally damages or knocks over a bicycle or a motorized mobility device, they can be charged with criminal trespass. If they intentionally damage one of these devices, then there's criminal negligence that they could be charged with. And then going on into the liability section on Section 19, this limits the city's liability in dealing with these items. If someone brings a group of scooters, they put them in the wrong place, it's in violation of the city ordinance, they're blocking sidewalks, and the city comes and they remove these items, they're not responsible for damaging them. In talking with the trial lawyers, I know there's some concern around the broadness of that. I think the intent, and GMA can correct me if I'm wrong, the intent of the cities is to make sure that the city officials and the city itself has no liability when they're just taking those devices and participating in those devices. I think what trial lawyers, and I don't want to speak for them, is concerned about if one of these operators are traveling down the road and there's a defective sidewalk or there's a manhole cover that's been left open or some other normal liability that there could be legal action taken, that it doesn't give a blanket immunity from that. So we can discuss that, but I know that's an issue that has been raised that we'll hear from here in just a minute. I think that pretty much is the legislation. As you can see, the idea here is that you can ride these vehicles in the bike lanes. It's designated. If there's no bike lane and the road is less than 35 miles an hour speed limit, there's no bike lane. You can ride these on the roadway in the cities unless they've restricted that. And if the speed limit's greater than 35 and there's no bike lane, then you can ride them on the sidewalks, but you cannot run over 7 miles an hour. Is that, and if I'm saying that incorrect, you can correct me, but, give some basic rules of the road. Before I take questions, if you don't mind, let Michael speak. Go ahead.
Well, Mr. Chairman, appreciate you taking part with us in this bill. I'm Michael McPherson with the Georgia Municipal Association, and with me is Allison Earls. She is in the legal counsel department, and she helped craft this legislation based on a lot of input that we've gleaned from other states, our international municipal lawyers associations guidelines, and then most important, working with a large group of cities who some have been impacted by the influx of scooters, and then those that we think would be most likely targets. So we had 12 cities involved in a working group that went on from October and into December. And then we invited the industry to come into those conversations. And our hope was that at our first meeting with representatives from Uber, which is Jump scooters, Lyft, Lime, and Bird, we hoped that they would come forward with us in a good faith negotiation to set up a baseline in the state that will help us with the public safety aspects and introduce definitions in the code that would legitimize them in the code. And with both of these, allow for cities to model ordinances that can refer back to the state code to give them some confidence that the state is looking at this stuff at the same time. And so in those negotiations, they were very long. They lasted 3 or 4 hours each time we met. And we brought up the definitions first, worked through those. We thought we had them had them pegged pretty good at first, and then we ended up talking about them all the way to the end. And then same with the rules of the road. We didn't take anything off the table. We asked for objection. We asked for comment as we moved on from one area to the next. Developed those standards for cross-jurisdictional travel that Chairman Tanner covered. And in the end, we ended up with 2 of the companies signing off with us, and then a third just the other day signed off with us, and then one, Bird, said they could not come with us. They were in it for the negotiations and to be part of the conversation, but they weren't with us at the end. So 3 out of 4 ain't bad, is what I hear, and we did good work, and we're glad to have had all of them at the table with us the whole time. Regardless of not having Bird come with us. But again, this is the product of a lot of work. There are a couple different things that were pointed out by a larger group of stakeholders that we introduced our concept to prior to Chairman Tanner dropping the bill. Those groups were the community improvement districts, several of the university system institutions, the Atlanta Transit Link Authority, MARTA, the Atlanta Beltline, the Atlanta Regional Commission, the Association of Police Chiefs, the Association of Sheriffs, the People for Bikes, the Shepherd Center, Greater Memorial Hospital, and several other groups that came on after I made this list. So we got feedback from some of those groups, and as a result, we do have some requested changes that we'd like to make today to the bill that's in front of you that we think will get at the goal, which is setting that baseline, and hopefully make a starting point in this state that all of our partners, and I don't know if I mentioned it, but ACCG was a partner the whole time too, and our county commissioners were in those meetings as well. But we wanted to come up with a starting point that moving forward, because this technology is so cutting edge, it's so new, and there's so many things that people are concerned about, that we develop that relationship with the industry so that in the future, once we have this baseline in place, we can go into more negotiations with them, come up with a model ordinance for this state that may be a beacon to the rest of the country on how to operate these things strategically to provide public safety in the best possible means. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, if you won't mind, can I point out some of the changes that we might want to make?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Go ahead.
All right. So first off, working with our bike groups, one of the things that we definitely talked about throughout the negotiations was that we want to mimic what's out there for bikes, but we know that these are not bikes. These scooters have very small wheels at this point. Bikes have very large wheels. That means that they can take a little bit more abuse. People grow up learning how to ride bikes. At least most Americans do if they're capable. And there's not that with the scooters. So you have to be daring enough to hop on them, and then you may not be agile enough to control them, and you would have to get used to the handling of them. And so we're seeing I think those learning curves happen right now when we have injuries and such, and hopefully those will go down with the institution of some baseline in the code for public safety and rules of the road for people to follow. Because right now they're going the wrong way down one-way streets, up and down sidewalks and such, and just we think that guidance will help. So the first change, like I said, comes from our bicycle partners, and it's on line 112, and we'll certainly rely on Legislative Council to offer any other changes that get at the point of our change, but we would like to remove the word bicycle from line 112 because the bicycle code has been developed over the past 100 years, and it's very well developed for children on sidewalks. And what we're trying to do here is set up a minimum speed and a passing distance for these mobility devices. And so we accidentally put bicycle in there. They know how to pass people if they're doing it right. So we would like to make that request to strike bicycle on 112 and ask that Legislative Council provide us with any help that we may need to get to that point. On, let's see, on line 244, we've been conscious the whole time throughout the negotiations that keeping the sidewalks clear is of the utmost concern, because we have folks in wheelchairs, we have folks that get around on foot in different means that use the sidewalks legally, and they should not be impeded by scooters laying in the sidewalk. And so this change, Allison, help me if I'm.
This change, it was pointed out to us that the term pedestrian, of course, includes people who are using wheelchairs and assistive devices to get around. To say a pedestrian or wheelchair is inappropriate, but to emphasize that and shine a spotlight on the importance of wheelchair and assistive device, we just want to change it to say in a manner that restricts pedestrian access, including access for people using wheelchairs or other assistive devices. So the issue was that it's not to say pedestrian or wheelchair, because people using wheelchairs are pedestrians.
So just a good point of clarification there for you to consider. On let's see, you got it. On 297 and 298. Okay, so the intent during, it's not 297 to 298, it's 291 through 294, I believe. But the fix may be in 297 and 298.
And Michael, let me just say, if there are minor changes, I don't know that we don't necessarily have to talk about every minor change in the sake of time. If it's something that's going to change the intent of the language, let's cover that. But otherwise, we'll clean it up offline in a substitute.
And so, this sort of would, I mean, the code allows for no more than 2 bicycles to ride abreast, and so I think the intent was to keep it at that in our negotiations. So we may have inadvertently messed that up, and so we hope that we would change it back to no more than 2 abreast. Lines 364 and 365. This gets back to the VIN number that you spoke of earlier, and so we had some comments saying that the owner's identification number would be what we're trying to get after, because these things may not have a manufacturer's identification number. So we wanted to make that distinction in the code, because VIN numbers come on cars. We didn't want it to be misunderstood. And so we would strike vehicle.
Again, Michael, I hate to interrupt you, but we don't have to go through every detail and change unless it's something that we didn't already cover or something significant.
Yeah, and I think that's it. There's some nomenclature changes that were suggested, and Legislative Council has those, and so we won't go over those. It's just to clean it up, make sure that we're using the correct nomenclature that the highway safety folks do.
All right, thank you very much. I tell you what, if y'all just want to stay there, I'm going to let anyone that wants to speak on the bill come up to the microphone here at the podium. I do have some questions first, so I want to cover. Do you have one, Representative Jones? All right, number 14.
I have a question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, about line 114. About the audible sound. When I'm walking to class at Georgia State, I notice people coming on those rides, but I never have heard a sound. So are we requiring these bikes on page 4 to have audible sounds.
What, and tell me the line number.
114.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, so the idea is that when passing a pedestrian, the operator would give warning through an audible sound, and I believe that most, if not all, the scooters come with a bell of some sort, but that would include the voice if they just wanted to shout. So it's just, you don't need to have an actual bell or device on the mobility device. So that, yes, it would be to say if they're going to pass you, they need to give notice.
And this is on a sidewalk, correct? Yeah.
And only in the event that the city has authorized the use on the
Right.
sidewalk. Yeah.
All right, number 12.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is under Section 4, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. It has to do with if serious injuries are caused, and I appreciate we're listing all kinds of things here, farm machinery. What if the cyclist is at fault and they're causing injury to an automobile or to someone there? It causes that automobile to go off lane or something to try to keep from hitting them. Is that covered in here somewhere, or is that liability? These companies have liability to cover things like that?
So liability insurance was held back from our discussions to allow for the negotiations to occur with the city that they chose to operate in. So if they were to cross jurisdictional lines, that's a very good question. I don't know.
Okay,
what that
I'm
would mean.
confused by that because I want to make sure that both sides would be protected, and it
Yes.
looks like there could be, you know, they come right where my apartment is. They don't beep, they don't do anything, they just go flying by, and they're on the sidewalks. So we do need regulations for it, but I just want to make sure, if one runs into my car, am I going to be in trouble, and they're going to try to say it's my fault? So who's going to be liable there? It sounds like all the liability is on one side.
And just to make sure you recognize there too, this is most of that's in current law. They're just for a motorcycle, a bicycle, a pedestrian, farm
Sure.
equipment. They're just adding in the motorized mobility device. But maybe when the industry comes up, they may be able to speak to that. But if they cause an accident when it's required that they report that to law enforcement could charge them with that damage and even arrest them if it became necessary. So.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
All right, number 25.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank y'all for getting together and working so hard on this. Michael, you and I have been talking about this for about 2 years now, or a year and a half, I don't remember. Just a couple questions. Statement, I'm disappointed Bird didn't come to the table. It seems like they're the ones that caused all the hoopla in my neighborhood up in Athens, so we'll talk about that offline. And this might be a question to anybody. I'm just trying to see, does this stop a university campus from allowing these on, or does it allow a university campus to not allow them on? You see what I'm saying? Like if it's a bicycle and it's on a road.
This doesn't speak to the university system.
So the answer is, if the University of Georgia wants to allow on their property the use of scooters, they could do that. If they wanted to prohibit the use of scooters, they could do that.
Sir, we've had conversations with the university system, and they've described what took place in Athens and some of their rationale and cited some of their regulations, but I will not speak for the university system.
Follow.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and this might be a question not for y'all, but just trying to figure out what the rules of the road are as far as a bicycle going onto a campus on a road. Does that all of a sudden become the university's property at that campus line, or how do you could ride a scooter through the campus? I mean, I'm just curious how this is working. I got a lot of people asking me about this.
And lead council, you can correct me but if the city owns the street and owns the right-of-way, then it's a public right-of-way. And if a bicycle's able to ride on any other street in the city, they'd be able to ride on that street. if it's enclosed in the campus and it's owned by the University of Georgia, it's not a city-owned right-of-way, then they would be able to restrict that access. But if in the town, Dahlonega, there's a lot of sidewalks going by the school and school buildings,
That's what I was-
but those are owned by the city. So the city regulates because they own that right-of-way. So they could allow scooters on their right-of-way. The university could not stop that. But if it's not city-owned right-of-way, then and it's university property, then they could regulate it. Yeah.
And I have
Go
one
ahead.
more, if I may. Thank you. And then, as we talked about earlier, you'll get with the parties that are interested in looking at the liability in the lines 393 through 395 that Chairman Tanner referenced at the beginning of the conversation.
Has anyone had any conversation with you around this yet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I spoke with the trial lawyers, and we're on the same page in terms of the purpose of us putting this language in there, and so they're going to offer some suggestions.
That's good. And let me just say too, for the sake of time, and I'm sorry, Representative, but if he covers any issues and has already agreed to work with you, you're welcome to come up and speak, but I don't know that it'd be necessary. But do you have any follow-up, Representative, or are you good?
Thank y'all for doing that.
Oh, yeah, this is brand new, and we appreciate y'all taking the time to consider it. It's something that does need to be considered, and we want to make it a more viable option and see it work, in places, because it seems to be a lot of fun for the folks that are willing to hop on one.
Representative Garner. Get the microphone.
Is there an age limit? Can a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old rent one of these and ride on the
Yes.
road?
So the rental companies, I think the companies, the providers are going to have to speak to that. I don't know if it's the same age for each one. We talked about it, but that wasn't our primary concern. It was mainly getting the rules of the road out there for whoever rides it. And there are rules of the road for and use of sidewalk for bicycles, and so that's we tried to mimic those for the age groups.
Great, thank you.
All right. And again, I think it's important to keep in mind that all this technology has just come out over the last few months. So this may be something we'll be having to address on a regular basis as we have other discussions. Number 17.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for really, you really did a great job with simplifying the code. I was noticing on line 122 of putting that Good Samaritan clause in there for any one of us who able to pick up one of these things and put them there safely. But I also noticed on line 380, kind of makes the mention of the charge for, I guess, criminal trespass by damage of property, or more criminal damage of property, a felony. I was wondering, were you aware of any cases whereby, I guess I'm trying to figure out how to measure intent to damage it. When these things are, it's unlike like a car, which four wheels, it's sitting there. If you're trying to damage that, it's pretty clear. But these things are pretty wobbly, and so I'm just kind of wondering that. I know it simplifies the code because it just applies it directly. But have you known any instances where the intent to fiddle with this thing has been such to where it's criminal?
Representative, yeah, I mean, the industry could probably speak to that a little bit better. We've seen media reports of folks hacking them, and I've seen examples of folks, broken ones on the street that, and it looked like intentional damage to me, but I didn't see it happen, so I couldn't speak to it. But I've seen lots of broken ones in and around town. The idea of the Good Samaritan clause is whether it's broken or whether it's not, if it's laying in the way, that person could be a good Samaritan and pick it up and just move it out of the way.
Okay.
And that's the intent. It would be horrible if somebody was doing that Good Samaritan Act and got caught up in one of the broken ones and were accused of something they didn't do. But I really don't think that would happen. I hope that it would not happen.
I hope so not. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Number 12.
Just another quick follow-up. Again, this is geared to those companies that have these bicycles. If someone owned their own little motor, these things would apply for them. It doesn't have to be just a corporate.
That is the idea, that because of the popularity, we would expect that this would become a product that folks that use them every day would want to invest in and buy one for themselves. And so coming up with those rules of the road would apply to everyone, and the parking as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. 27.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I was kind of ebonically naive as I rode around Atlanta and saw these people on these scooters, and I asked my best friend who's a resident, well, where do they get them from? And where do they pick them up at? You know, being a good old country boy from Savannah, Georgia, and riding around those squares, I'm sure I was just in lieu very naive. But they're subscribers, am I correct? They have an app.
Yes, I believe each of the companies that are offering have an app. I have the Uber app, and so when I looked the other day, I was like, well, gosh, they've provided these scooters that they call Jump. I didn't realize that they were on the app. So if y'all have the Uber app, you can switch and look at. If you have any of the apps, you can check it out. But Uber is something that we all use a lot, and you can switch the ride to the scooter, and see where they're at.
And you can. There are a multitude of them. You can see them all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to commend you and the chairman on this bill. It gave me a lot of clarity, and I think I'll try to ride one.
Let us know when that's going to take place. I just want to tell you that you're making Uber extremely happy by continuously talking about their wonderful app, and so they're going to hire you as a promotional guy.
It's not intentional. I mean, all the companies have an app, I think, and it makes ease of use.
I'm not complaining. He's just giving you a thumbs up back there. All right. Now what we're going to do, first of all, let me ask this. The industry folks that are here that's been working with GMA, is there anyone here that wishes to be heard? All right, come up to the podium if you would. Introduce yourself and tell us who you're with. And while he's coming out, let me say this. If there's industry folks who are here but don't plan to speak, then I'm going to assume that's because you've been working with GMA and you feel like between now and the time we move this forward that your concerns are going to be addressed and that you'll ultimately be able to support the final product. So if that's not the case, let us know, or if that changes, let us know. So go ahead, introduce yourself.
Hey guys, Murphy Talmadge, Barnes Thornburg. I represent Bird Rides. Just wanted to come up and say, just to clarify, we have been participating in the conversations with GMA. I didn't want anyone, Representative Fry, wanted to make sure that you were aware that we have been participating in those conversations. And I think we've got a couple minor things that we'd like to address that we're working with and we're discussing before the meeting. And thank you, Chairman Tanner, for hearing this. And that's all I wanted to say, just to make sure, to clear up any doubts that we weren't participating with GMA in this. Thank you, guys.
Some of the best testimony I've heard all day. Thank you. All right. Anybody else here that wishes to speak from the industry, or anyone here wishing to speak in opposition of the bill? Here would be my plan, is that we've taken public testimony today. So if there's something that comes up in the substitute that you have specific concerns about, we'll take that. But other than that, we will not take public testimony the first of next week. We'll have committee discussion, and we'll be prepared to take action at that time. Again, thank you, GMA, and thank you to the industry who've been working on this for a few months now. New technology that we need to regulate, but we appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, now we are going to go on into House Bill 215. We have a substitute that came in late on this, but I believe Representative Nulowich will be able to explain that to us. So we're going to pass that out now. And we'll ask Representative, if you would, just take your seat at the table and we'll get started.
Wait for the substitute to get passed out.
Yeah, and just for clarification, just make sure that we have the right LC number. I think everybody's got it now, so but just read it to us.
Yes, we're working off of LC 392171S, as in Sam.
All right, we're ready when you are.
Thank you, Chairman Tanner. I bring before you today HB 215, and again, this is LC 392171S. This addresses electric-assisted bicycles, or e-bikes, is how I'll be referring to them. The bill makes a couple simple changes to Code Section 12.3.114. It allows for e-bikes to be ridden on certain trails and also in bike lanes and on bike paths, and it sets standards for e-bike operation and establishes a classification system for the different types of e-bikes. An e-bike looks like what most of us think of as a bike, except for where the water bottle would go, you will have a battery pack. And that battery pack, that power, can assist the rider with hills. It basically doesn't necessarily make you pedal faster. It makes you pedal better. It makes it more efficient. So it's really a wonderful option for people who use their bikes to commute. They don't want to get to work in a flop sweat, perhaps. It helps make that a little bit easier. It assists the rider with hills. So 215 really, and there seems to be a theme today. This is an example of a code change that's really necessary because of an emerging technology. You'll hear more about this from Greg Goodwin. He's with Pedigo Alpharetta. He's here to talk to this bill today. And currently there is a little bit of confusion about the rules for e-bikes since they aren't really addressed by our current code. I also want to note that this bill was developed with input from GMA and ACCG, and both of those organizations do support this bill. So going through the substitute here, the Section 1 is really just your definitions. Section 2 gets into, Section 2 defines, it allows the bikes to be used on bike lanes and in bike paths. It also specifies the power output for e-bikes. Section 4 goes into the details for the classification systems for the e-bikes with Class 1, Class 2, Class 3. It further specifies where e-bikes can be used, and it specifies a minimum age of 15 for the Class 3 e-bikes. It also addresses helmet use, which is consistent with our current helmet use laws in Georgia. Section 5 removes language that is regarding electric-assisted bicycles. That actually it removes the phrase electric-assisted bicycles from Code Section 40-6-351. This is intended to address mopeds, and those are decidedly different from e-bikes. And the same goes for Section 6. So I'm happy to take any questions. I can invite Mr. Goodwin up here to speak to the bill also. I thank you for your favorable consideration.
Are there any questions of the representative while we're waiting on him to come up? And just want to ask, GMA's here, also still here, but they've also worked with you on this legislation, and I believe that we could report that they're happy with the legislation.
Definitely, yes. GMA and ACCJ also.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Appreciate you having me out today. Good afternoon, Chairman Tanner and members of the committee. My name is Greg Godwin, and my wife and kids are here with me today, and we own Pedigo Electric Bikes in Alpharetta. About 3 years ago, I came to a crossroads in my life. My business of 25 years just wasn't fulfilling me anymore, and as an avid cyclist, I always dreamed about owning my own bike shop. But as they say in the bike business, to make $1 million, you got to have $2 million. So during my cycling research, I heard electric bikes were the fastest growing segment of the cycling industry, and Pedigo brand was the largest, most successful e-bike brand out there. So I decided to sell my current business and follow up on my cycling passion and open a Pedigo store. These aren't your regular bikes. You don't see the Aero skin suits on these cyclists. They're everyday people who want to get out there and have fun while they exercise. My demographic is baby boomers 40 to 80 years old, and they aren't in it for the speed. They're in it for the fun and exercise. To be honest, these bikes don't go faster, they go easier. You have to pedal pretty hard to get an electric bike to go 20 miles an hour. That is the top speed by law of a Class 1 or Class 2 e-bike. As a matter of fact, most road cyclists go faster than a Class 1 or Class 2 e-bike. Some people call them cheater bikes. Heck yeah, they're cheater bikes. They're cheating the wind and the hills. E-bikes are the answer for everyone who wants to ride a bike and enjoy the outdoors, but is prevented from doing so because of hills, long distances, being a little overweight, or maybe some medical issue has kept them off a regular bike. Americans are living longer than ever. Exercise is the most important thing we can do to stay healthy and fit, and riding a Pedego electric bike is one of the most enjoyable ways to do that. E-bikes make you feel like a kid again. Studies show that electric bike riders ride 3 times more often and 3 times further than a regular bike, and they experience even greater cognitive health benefits than those riding conventional bikes. Baby boomers are parking their cars and using e-bikes for commuting, running errands, and to explore local communities and beyond. This means fewer cars on the road, and I like that idea. It also means more economic opportunity for the many attractions, restaurants, and other businesses that will now be within e-biking distances for residents and visitors. This bill will create a new designation for electric-assisted bicycles and clearly differentiate them from motor vehicles that are prohibited on our multi-use trails and pathways. It will provide baby boomer demographic and others with legitimate access to ride their e-bikes and enjoy the outdoors where other bikes are allowed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Any questions?
All right, I think we do have one. Representative Carpenter's wanting to try one out.
So I got a tear in my eye when you start talking about overweight guys on a bike. You hit close to home there. So I actually rode one around the Capitol the other day. It's a great product and it's a great bill, and I appreciate you bringing it. And I'm excited about your business. I know your kids, so I may be catching up with you after the session.
Please do.
Yeah.
That's a dealership. Yeah, there's 2 of them in the state of Georgia. They're all over the world. Pedego's a brand that's worldwide.
Thank you. All right, number 14.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about line 145 and 146. It says violation of any provision of this subsection shall not constitute negligence. But when I read a few lines up above that on 134 through 144, it talks about persons shall wear a bicycle helmet. But if they don't wear a helmet, they will not be in violation?
This is with the, talking about no person under the age of 15 years shall operate a Class 3 electric assisted bicycle, and then it goes into the helmet. Yes, so no person shall operate or be a passenger on Class 3 electric assisted bicycle without wearing a bicycle helmet. And Class 3s is defined in the legislation are bicycles, e-bikes that can reach a speed between 20 and 28 miles per hour. So the question is with regard to negligence, and I'll actually defer to counsel on that point, if I may.
Sure. I think negligence has to do with liability if there's an accident versus criminal. So they could be, they're not, for insurance purposes and those kind of things, you're not negligent just because you weren't wearing your helmet in an accident.
And correct me if I'm wrong, counsel, but it's not to say they couldn't be held negligent. It's just per se that's not automatically negligence. So there could be evidence brought forward of other things that led to them being at fault, but that in itself is not negligence. So, does that answer your question, Representative?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Vice Chairman Carson.
Thank you for bringing this, Representative Nolowitz. I appreciate the gentleman's testimony as well. My question's in regard to lines 104 to 107, Terry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just very sensitive about interstate commerce. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like we're making a requirement on an out-of-state manufacturer that, in regard to the permanent fixation of some label, in regard to whether or not it's a Class 1, 2, or 3 bike.
Mm-hmm.
Is that done already? Is this something that if I'm manufacturing bikes in Missouri or Florida, whatever, and is this another regulation if I want to sell in Georgia?
Well, and I'm going to defer to the dealer here because I would think that it's even if a bicycle is manufactured out of state, the dealer who sells the bike would be affixing that label.
Yes, they did.
So just further follow-up.
Yes, go ahead, and if you would, speak in the microphone there when you answer.
So can you describe that process? Does it go on now? Is it simple to comply with this? And if not, if it's not easy for the dealer to comply with this, is this something that we would be pushing back to the manufacturer upon?
The manufacturer puts the sticker on the bike before they ship it out to the dealer.
For all bikes?
As far as I know my brand does.
What market? I'm not asking about your market share of your shop. I'm asking about the brand that you sell. What is the market share of the brand you sell of all e-bikes, roughly?
Pedego is the largest selling electric bike in the United States. I couldn't answer specifics.
Yeah, I'll note that the Manufacturers Association does fully support this bill.
The e-bike manufacturers?
Yes.
I'm with Casey. I didn't know there was one. Okay.
There
thank
is
you.
an association for just about everything.
And these classes are already out there. We're not defining these classes, so the manufacturers are not just having to do something just for Georgia.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
All right, any other questions? All right, if not, we are in, is anybody, first of all, let me ask this, anybody else here that would like to speak in favor or in opposition of House Bill 215? All right, if not, we're in, okay, we've got, we're in the posture for motions, number 22. Good, microphone.
Pass. I move do pass for LC 392171S.
Motion and a second, do pass. Is there any discussion? Yes, sir, Mr. Jones, Representative Jones.
Yes, I am going back to Representative Parson. I am curious. I'm ready to vote for it, but does the label come with it or not? I mean, you're sure about that?
I'm positive that the label comes on my bikes. I'm not sure about every manufacturer, but I think it was a law established last year that Class 1 and Class 2 and Class 3 stickers have got to be affixed to the bike before they're shipped out to dealers.
A federal law or law from that state? Because if it's a federal law, of course it's across the country, but from that state, it wouldn't have any. I tell you what, let me stop, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
there is
They
a
can go
federal,
ahead
yeah,
and maybe just answer that question later on.
Yeah, and there is a federal definition that has specific language to delineate the top speed of bikes, and that Class 3 definition is also a federal definition. So, and I can get that exact answer for you, but I do believe that is defined in the federal definitions.
If it's labeled, you got the definition, but if it's labeled.
Right.
Yeah, if you would, just get that for us, and then that way if there's questions, especially on the floor, you'll have that. All right, we have a motion and a second, no discussion. All those in favor of do pass House Bill 215, aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. You have your bill, so you'll just need to fill out the forms it rules, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Thank you. All right. Next on the agenda, we're going to hear from House Bill 509, Representative John Carson. Let's see, what are you?
21. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year we passed a groundbreaking piece of legislation, and I appreciate you carrying House Bill 930. Within 930, because of unique circumstances in Cobb County in regard to transit, one of the things that 930 did was set up a special district for transit, and it gave Cobb County the ability to draw a special district for basically taxation as well as the transit service provided. That transit district committee in 930 is set to expire December 1st of 2019. All this does is extends the date by 3 years, as per a unanimous resolution from Representative Elwood's and I's county and Sheila's as well. That resolution was passed by our commission Tuesday night, 5-0. I'm just asking for the committee's favorable consideration to extend this for 3 years. And I understand this is hearing only, but I just wanted to bring it to the committee's attention.
Yeah, and let me tell you why it's hearing only is because depending on the action that happens as we move 511 forward, Representative Carson had asked that we considered merging that into that bill because it would be an appropriate place for it. So that's something that we'll look at. Number 26.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify also that extending the sunset for the district provision does not require that the vote be a district-only vote. There is still the option to have a county-wide vote. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. Thank you for pointing that out. That this just more or less preserves an option for Cobb County. That's all it does. This is endorsed by 5-0 by our commissioners, unanimously by our Cobb Chamber, a number of our CIDs and business community.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any questions? All right, hearing none. Again, we'll be prepared to move that bill at our next meeting, either with merging it in or a separate bill. All right, I want to mention one thing. Chairman Smith, Representative Richard Smith, had asked me for us to consider, and you have it in your package, House Bill 368. He had thought this was going to go just through the normal resolution process in the House, but it was assigned to our committee. This is something similar to what they did in the Senate Transportation Committee. This is an urging resolution to construct Interstate 14 across his part of the state. And it has broad support, bipartisan support from the members from that part of Georgia. I would ask you if you're inclined, we could move that now since it's just a urging resolution, has no effect in law, or we could bring that forward at the next meeting. But if you're inclined, we could move that now.
Can you describe where exactly
yes, I-14. It should be in your file, but you can use mine. Let's give him just a second. If anybody else has any questions, take just a minute to look over that. But it's I-14, which has been talked about for several years in that part of the state. We can probably get Representative Smith may have some specific information. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is true. I-14's been talked about for years to give that east-west corridor across the state down in the mid to southern region. We know I know, and Chairman Smith knows right at this moment, there are no funds there, but there have been some people that have really worked real hard on this and very energetic about it. So we've signed this urging resolution and appreciate y'all's favorable consideration.
Describe to Representative Carson and the other members of the committee where that area generally is located.
It come across near Columbus, Georgia, go across toward Macon, Georgia, toward Augusta. We have a fall line freeway down there now that's a 4-lane, but it's not a limited access. But this would be as a true interstate, limited access. So, but same route.
All right. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Sorry, I apologize for being ignorant about this, but Representative Smith, it says here, whereas the completion of I-14, the fastest growing port in Georgia, the fastest growing port in the nation, Port Savannah, will have greater access. Well, you're describing an interstate that would go from Columbus through Macon, across 16, and go up to Augusta. So this wouldn't go to Savannah. So would you? Okay, but it would connect 16 and 14. Okay, got it.
Gives east-west connectivity.
I understand.
All right. Again, since I don't want any member of the committee to feel like we've kind of sprung anything on you, so if there's any objection to moving this today, we'll put this off until you have more time to consider it. But all right, we have a motion to pass second. All right, any discussion? All right, all those in favor, aye. Any opposed? All right, ayes have it. All right, the last item on the agenda is House Bill 511. I'm going to go down and ask our Vice Chairman to take over for me.
Okay, Chairman Tanner, House Bill 511. Just for everybody's clarification, could you state real quick the LC number we're working on? Because I know it's been a work in process.
Yes, sir. LC 392111.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
We're going to give Abby's getting a PowerPoint up for me. which I may end up having to go to the podium to present, to be able to forward the PowerPoint. All right, thank you very much. If you read the Atlanta Journal today, yesterday afternoon, and other publications, you've been hearing about this bill. So I want to go through this to give you an opportunity to hear it, to have some information on it, but not try to move it today, but to get you up to speed. Just in way of some background information for the committee, and most of you who've been here for at least a couple of years are familiar with most of this. But in 2017, this committee passed legislation creating the Transit Governance and Funding Commission. Several members of this committee have served on that. Most of them that are left actually are Democrats. I think this must be a promotional opportunity or something, because we've got Jason Shaw is now a statewide constitutional officer. Christian Coomer is now a statewide constitutional officer. So I'm just still stuck here working, but so this has been going on. This is not something we just started. We've been having this conversation now statewide for a couple of years. The initial part of the work was last year, House Bill 930. You heard Representative Carson talk about that earlier, which created the ATL. But we said then, and this brings that to fruition, that we needed to address the rest of Georgia. We had other urban centers that we need to talk about. We had the rural parts of our state that we need to talk about, and that's what the bill in front of you today does. All right. There's a complex governance structure around transit across Georgia. It's managed by 6 state agencies, 27 planning organizations, and over 95 local transit agencies. There's gaps in public transit services. 36 counties in our state, rural counties for the most part, do not have any type of public transit service. Many of our counties, like mine that I live in, has a dial-a-bus type program, primarily used by the older population in our community, but 36 have no form of transit at all. Now, this affects more than 1 million people in our state, so this is an issue for our state. We've talked about this before. Georgia ranks 37th in state transit spending per capita, 45th in state spending on per transit trip. And this is an opportunity that's before you today to bring new technologies. Some of them, 2 of them, we've heard about today. There's others there that are coming that we can all bring to bear here on our state. You also see the Association of Engineers issued a D- rating for transit in the infrastructure report card for our state. We were one of the few states that actually went up overall, and that was because of the work we've done with House Bill 170, and made mention of the work we done with House Bill 930 last year. But one of the things they said was implementation is going to be important to watch, and this is part of what this bill's about. All right. All right, this is a general structure. We're looking at creating a consolidated state agency. What we're talking about is, we call it, I think our colleagues over in the Legislative Council, not Jenna, but one of her colleagues came up with the term G-Mobile. Just in a joking conversation, it's kind of stuck, but it's the Georgia Mobility and Innovation, the Department of Mobility and Innovation, I'm sorry. And that would replace GRETA. So we would be doing away with GRETA, replacing it with this entity. This would be a single agency accountable to the governor for all transit-related programs statewide. So this would have a commissioner appointed by the governor. It consolidates transit responsibilities currently spread out across 5 other state entities. This includes GDOT, DHS, DCH, CERTA, and the ATL. Regional mobility zones. Mobility zones would tailor transit plans to local needs and promote regional planning and coordinated services. The idea there is that our state is diverse, it's different. What's important here in the Atlanta region is not necessarily the same as Southwest Georgia, and what's important in Southwest Georgia may be different from a transportation perspective than it is in Northeast Georgia. So regional mobility zones would be tailored to the needs of the communities they serve. And this would also dedicate transit funding and incentives. New funding includes ride share fees from taxis, Uber, Lyft, others, and incentivizes private sector investment and attempts to decrease, and I think will decrease, unemployment. And we'll talk through some of those things. And I think it's important too, because as we've looked at this legislation, one of the concerns I've heard is around the rideshare fee. And I know our friends with Uber and Lyft, or Uber at least, is still here. And you can also talk with the taxis, the limos, and others. We've worked with them over the past 2 years to get to the point we are today. And this would replace, on taxis and limos, they currently pay 7% sales tax. Revenue Department and some of the private sector companies have some disagreements around what sales tax is owed on other companies, but this would, from this point forward, establish everyone's on the same playing field. It's 50 cents per ride, unless it is a pooled ride. And let me say this, there's a few changes that we're going to have to make to the legislation before we bring it back to you. One of them is we inadvertently left out the fact that for a regular ride in a vehicle, it's 50 cents. But to encourage pooling of vehicles, to get vehicles off the road, we're reducing that to 25 cents. So it's half, basically, half the fee. And again, that's something that we've dealt very closely with the rideshare companies on, that they support the 25 less fee for the pool rides, and that was just inadvertently left out, but we'll have that corrected. All right. Governance and organization. This streamlines the bureaucracy, and that's one of the things that we saw when we traveled the state, and we went to places in rural Georgia specifically, and they talked about having to deal with different state agencies. 3 separate state agencies get 3 separate inspections, 3 separate reports, and we knew that we needed to streamline that process down. Here, the commissioner would be appointed by the governor. And not only would he oversee the Department of Mobility and Innovation, he would also oversee the ATL and CERTA. Now, let me say this. We did some heavy lifting last year for the ATL. Nothing in this legislation changes the board's power authority. The board runs the ATL, they approve the plans, et cetera, the expenditures, that type of thing that's under the board. The only thing this does is that director of the ATL will also be the commissioner. So the governor will appoint one person to oversee all of this, so it streamlines the bureaucracy. We can have shared staff, shared office space. It's also important to note we're not talking about standing up a brand new agency and having to go out and rent office space or hire new employees. These people exist today. The employees exist, the staff exist, the offices exist. This is streamlining from different agencies under one, so the dollars would come from those other agencies. G-Mobile, CERTA, and ATL have a common mission, and that's to make getting around easier from point A to point B, Atlanta and statewide. And this would link administration and oversight and make an effective statewide policy for that and planning. Greta, there's a few powers that Greta still has, mainly around DRIs. That would be moved over to the ATL board in the Atlanta area. We've worked closely with Chris Thomason, who heads up both CERTA and the ATL now, and Greta around the best locations for those services. Consolidated functions, again, that would be staff from GDOT, DHS, and DCH who currently handle transit, specifically rural transit. It's existing transit personnel. We're not looking to hire new personnel, just make better use of the ones that we have. Funding and incentives, I think this is important to note. Currently, between these departments, primarily through federal dollars, we're receiving $60 million plus rural, small, urban human services transport dollars. We're receiving $100 million plus of non-emergency medical transport dollars. Also, we've talked with and been working with the non-emergency transport companies. There's no desire to disrupt that system. It is just putting it under this agency to streamline the process. It also, last year in House Bill 930, we allowed the Atlanta metro counties the option of having an additional 1 cent sales tax, up to 1 cent, up to 30 years for the purpose of transit services. If they got the approval of the ATL board to do that, being in compliant with the regional plan, Other counties across the state, specifically Chatham, Savannah, Athens, Clarke, had asked for that, so we came up with a scenario that just hasn't worked in the legislation, which was partnering with a neighboring county. So what we're doing here in the legislation you have before you is coming back and saying a single county can do it, but they have to get the approval of the Mobility Council, and I think I probably skipped over that, so let me say that now. Each of these mobility zones across the state, and I'll tell you what we'll do, I'll flip. We're looking at these mobility zones in the state having 9. Number 9 there is the ATL, and it's shaded white because there's no changes in that. It's the same counties, it's the Greta area, it's the ATL area, nothing's changing, the board stays the same, but in the other 8, we're establishing mobility councils. One of the things we work very, very hard to do in all the times we've worked on this legislation is not to create more government, not to have other boards or having other appointments that would be necessary. So but we wanted buy-in from local communities on their regional transit plans, because each mobility zone will develop their own mobility plan, yearly plan that'll be at least a 6-year and 20-year plan. So we need buy-in from the local commissioners, the local cities. So what we said was the regional commissions all have the chairmen of the commissions and the mayors for every city on the regional commission. So the chairman of the regional commission will appoint the mobility council for that region. Mobility council will be responsible for approving that regional plan. Now, one of the things that we've talked about specifically with a couple of the counties, Athens, Clarke, there's some concern there. Well, what if our regional commission doesn't approve it and it affects us? Or if our relationship, and Athens didn't say this, but just in general terms, if our relationship with the regional commission is not good, what would we do? So one of the things that we have explored, and one of the changes that we're going to be talking with Lake Council about making, is saying if you're in an area that's in an MPO, like Athens, Clarke, or major urban areas, and if you're turned down, you can go directly to the commissioner of the department. He can sign off on that. The attempt here is that people are not just operating in silos. We have a regional approach to this. One of the other things that we're looking at is we need some dedicated funding. It's one of the problems that we have all over the state. In House Bill 170, we did $75 million for capital projects for transit. Last year in House Bill 930, we did $100 million, but we don't have an ongoing revenue source. Here, in the rideshare fee, we're estimating that we would collect somewhere between $30 and $60 million in annual revenue. That revenue in the legislation follows the same language that House Bill 170 follows, where it says this revenue is intended to be used for transit and this mobility in the state. If it's not, then it stops being collected, so to protect that revenue. In addition, we're looking at creating some innovative pilot programs, and we'll talk a little bit about those here in just a minute. This is just I think you have a copy of this, but this is just information around what the mobility zone does versus the regional commission. The point here is to make it clear, and we've worked closely with the regional commissions, that the boundaries of the mobility zone follows the boundaries of the regional commissions. In a couple of cases, we combine 2 regional commissions. Now, we don't combine them for any other purpose other than this mobility zone. But we wanted to work very closely with them. Again, trying to use something that already exists in the law today, already exists on the ground that people are familiar with, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel or create more bureaucracy. But this just shows you all the things that the regional commission's doing today, they'll continue to do. And again, we've been working closely with the regional commissions. This is a dedicated funding source we talked about. We went over the 50 versus 25 cents. We also talked about the 1 cent single county transit T-Splosh for transit purposes that's there, that if the 9 counties that are the smaller urban transit systems, that have small urban transit systems, did this, they could raise as much as $200 million annually. So there's an opportunity for some major money to be put into transit by these counties. And I will tell you, at least 3 of these urban centers have talked with us and have expressed their intent to do this once this is stood up. And ultimately, it would have to be approved by their local voters. And then the incentive programs, I want to talk to you just a minute about those. The idea here is with this department is several things. Number one, we're streamlining bureaucracy. We're going to make it easier and better to provide services to every part of our state, but specifically those urban centers and those rural parts of the state. One of the things, if you think about, you have communities like Columbus or like Athens or Macon or Augusta or Savannah that are urban. They have hospitals, they have health care, they have schools, they have jobs, but then around those communities typically is fairly rural. Those urban centers have transportation opportunities, but when you get outside the city into the rural areas, there's just not a lot of opportunities. So we want to find a way to remove those transportation barriers. One of the things that we want to do here is through some of this revenue that we're going to be collecting is we want to create an opportunity for innovation, out-of-the-box thinking around this area. Two of them that we're rolling out as part of this legislation is a tax credit for employers who provide transportation. So if an employer, and I was talking to one of the departments that does economic development in our state, they were talking about a specific location in Savannah that was expanding. They were having a hard time finding employment, but they knew that there were employees a county or two over, but they didn't have reliable transportation to get to work. So the idea is let's find a way to incentivize that business to break that barrier of transportation, and if they'll provide transportation, and we're not specific what that looks like. It could be working with our partners at Uber and Lyft for vouchers to go pick them up or to provide a pool shuttle with Uber and Lyft, and in conversations with them, we know that they have an interest in those private-public partnerships. It could be contracting with the Savannah-Chatham transit system to go outside Savannah-Chatham for a fee to pick those workers up. Whatever it is, if they take an unemployed person who's currently not working, then they provide them transportation to work, then they would receive a tax credit. And again, this would be paid for through the funds. Now, I will tell you, and I won't cover it all in detail today, but we've ran the numbers. I'm a business guy, and this feels good to me, and it's a good policy, and it helps remove barriers to transportation. But from a business perspective, it makes a good business case because we're giving this help to people who are unemployed to be able to have a business provide transportation. So if you run the numbers out on the amount that we will gain from the income tax that they'll be paying, we actually make money by providing the tax credit. So we're not going to provide the tax credit to people who are currently employed, and we're not providing it to people who don't stay employed. So if the business has to hire them and keep that employee to receive it. Second thing, which I think is very exciting, is we looked at the very poorest communities in our state, and we identified 22 counties. The way we identified them is we said we want to look at 125% or greater of the state unemployment rate or 75% or less of the average family income. 22 states, all in very rural South Georgia. Very few opportunities, and transportation is a huge barrier for those folks. So what we're looking at here is creating a pilot program, working with the Department of Labor and our mobility manager on the ground, working with the private business community, the nonprofits, the GED centers, and others to identify the folks who need the assistance and provide direct assistance for transportation to help these people get to either a school opportunity like a GED center or an adult learning center or a technical school or to a job. So again, this is not about just giving you a ride or a free ride somewhere, but it's about helping you in turn help yourself. And again, once those folks get a GED, get a technical education, which we're already providing assistance on other scopes, and get a job, we get more money back into the state than we're paying out. So again, from a business perspective, it's a good opportunity for us. Going on here, again, benefits and outcomes, consolidated state agency, a one-stop shop that they get up every single day with one thing on their mind, and that is providing mobility and transit and alternative transportation services to all the residents in our state, and how to expand those, how to think outside the box, working with some of the partners we've heard from today on a couple other pieces of legislation. That would be the point agency that would help bring forward regulation in the future on a lot of these things we've talked about today, so that when it got to us, we know it had been clearly looked at, and I think that we'll be better off as a result of that. And then regional mobility zones. One of the things that we want to look at as we move forward with this legislation and move forward with this agency is how can we incentivize communities to think regionally with their transportation. One of the things we heard over and over again is we have a dial-a bus, but it either doesn't run when we need it or it stops at the county line and it doesn't go where we need it to go. So we know there's 3 regional commissions that have regional transit services. We do not want to require a county or a city do that, but we can find ways through the revenue to incentivize that. Maybe we adjust the match, incentivize these people to think regionally in providing the service. Again, having boots on the ground with a regional mobility manager that knows his or her communities in their area, they can come up with the best course of action as we move forward. And I think one of the keys here is having a dedicated revenue source, because with a dedicated revenue source, we're going to allow these mobility managers and the commissioner of this department to have an opportunity to create innovation and ideas that they can bring forward. And I told someone the other day, this legislation could be the gift that keeps giving and giving and giving, because every year they can create new and innovative ways to remove transportation barriers in our state. I don't think other states, let me say this, we've heard some concern around Medicaid funding through the non-emergency transports, federal funding dollars. We have looked at other states who have streamlined under one agency their federal dollars, so that can be done. We do that today with Medicaid funding for some other functions. For instance, Medicaid comes into health and they have an MOU with the Department of Behavioral Health to provide certain services. So all of these things can be done. They have been done in other parts of the country, but no one in the country that we can find has went to being this innovative. This is legislation that I personally get excited about. I think it's very much a bipartisan effort. It has been from the very beginning. It does not matter if you're from South Georgia or North Georgia or the cities or urban centers across the state. This legislation has the potential to change real Georgians' lives. Someone, I don't think he'd mind me saying this, but Representative Al Williams, we briefed him the other day. He couldn't be here today, but when we were going through it, he said, I had a representative who, or not a representative, but a person in my community. He said, he's more conservative than you. You look liberal compared to him. And he told me the other day, he said, I have heard about this rural Georgia stuff, and I'm looking forward to seeing when something really comes here to help us. And I think this is one of the first things that can really make a difference in rural Georgia. Because, again, we heard from staffing agencies across Georgia. We heard from others. We heard from employers. And one of the barriers is transportation. So I'm excited to see this roll out. I wanted to get it out to you today. It's a long bill. I understand that. We've given you some handouts that have quick breakdowns that you can read that tells you what the legislation does. I'm available, so I want everyone to feel very comfortable with this legislation from the committee. So tomorrow or tonight or anytime you want to talk to me, please reach out to me. That's why I did not want to try to push this to a vote. It's not straightforward legislation, and I understand that. And there'll be some tweaks that we'll need to make, but as we move forward, we want to get it right. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Well, appreciate that. It's a lot to take in. We have 2 questions. I saw number 23. Casey, Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Tanner, just a quick question. As we raise the funds, this $30 to $60 million we're talking about, what is the opportunity on federal pull-down dollars as well to match that?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I not only do we have potential to pull down federal dollars from that, but we also have the potential to pull down federal dollars from a place like Athens Clarke, who passes the sales tax. If they have a dedicated 20-year funding source, they can pull down federal dollars. In addition, we believe by streamlining the process and combining these dollars, we're going to have the ability to capture more federal dollars than we have been today. So, and one of the things, the speaker traveled to Washington and he beginning a session, maybe before session, and had in talking with the president and talking with the administration, one of the things they keep telling us is they're looking for innovation. We met with the Secretary of Transportation back a few months ago, and that's one of the things we heard, innovation. So Georgia is helping itself. We helped ourselves with House Bill 170. We helped ourselves with House Bill 930. And we're helping ourselves with this. The other thing that we're doing is we're creating a list of barriers at the federal level where we think that the federal government's standing in the way through regulatory action of helping us streamline these processes. So we're going to go talk to them, and we're going to tell them these things. All they can do is tell us no. We can't control them. We can control what we do here. But yes, we feel very confident that we have an opportunity to pull down more federal dollars.
Chairman Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of real quick questions. The Mobility Council, is that going to affect what we have in our GDOT board or the other boards that are out there? Will they still stay in place?
Yes, this has nothing to do with any, the only thing this affects GDOT with would be around the transit operations that they provide, but this has nothing to do with the GDOT board, nothing to do with regional commission boards. The only two functions the Mobility Council has is, number one, is to review and ultimately approve the regional transit plan, mobility plan. Number two would be to consider a single county's request for a single county transit splosh in their region. But all it is a subcommittee of the Regional Commission Board.
Who's, quote, the boss? Where's the buck going to stop?
For the whole department?
The whole thing. Will it be the manager, the mobility manager, or will it still go to GDOT, or some of these, like DCH, will it still go there?
It goes to the governor's appointment to the commissioner of the Department of Mobility and Innovation, which will be at the same level as the Commissioner of Corrections, the Commissioner of the Department of Public. It's a department chair level commissioner for the department, and they answer directly to the governor.
Okay, one other follow, if that's okay.
Yes.
Just a little inquiry about, are we going to be okay with CMS by changing those dollars, because they are federal dollars that we're using for that non-emergency? And I have a little bit of a concern there to make sure that we don't lose anything.
Right. Yes, that concern's been expressed. We've ran that down, and we feel very confident. And we have people on the team that we've been working with that are experts in that area. And again, other states are already doing that. So that concern we will be able to get around. The other thing that's important to note is that both of the department who handles that today and this department will both work for the same person, and that's the governor of the state of Georgia. And we have, in this legislation, it stands up the commissioner on July 1st, but the department, everything doesn't move, and the full department's not stood up for 1 year later. So it gives the governor, his staff, and the budget office the time they need to make all those necessary arrangements, MOUs, et cetera.
Will it include emergency vehicles also? And I'll throw it out there, air transport in any way?
No, ma'am.
It's all just ground.
That's correct. It's all things that fall under what we call transit services, which would be the 5311 money from GDOT, the non-emergency medical transports, but it's not any type of air or anything.
Or rail?
No, ma'am. Nothing.
Okay,
No.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Carl, U-27, Representative
Mr. Chairman,
Gilliard. Yeah.
you all truly, and this committee is making me feel like I'm on America's Got Talent today. We're winning with transportation. I had a chance to speak to GTA this summer, and I was really touched by the number of rural counties that didn't have viable transportation. I would deem them as the have or the have-nots. The innovative parts of this, when you talked about the tax incentives, that is, we need to look at addressing poverty in so many ways. So I commend you on that portion. What is the amount for the tax credit?
I believe the estimate, let me see if I think I actually have that up there. It's just over $1 million would be the expenditure. Again, the idea is to roll out a 3-year pilot program. Both of these would be a pilot program. It's just, and I'll give you, I think I actually have a copy of the chart that shows you how much it is in cost, how much the benefit would come back from the taxes paid in by the employees, and then what the net is. I'll give you a copy of that. But it's a 3-year pilot. It would be funded using dollars that are generated by this revenue. It's a little over $1 million. And one of the things we wanted to do and why we made it a pilot is government starts a lot of programs, but they don't oftentimes go back and see if they really work. So one of the things we want to do with this department is create an opportunity for innovation and new ideas and outside the box thinking, but we want to make sure we're not wasting money. So we want to make sure that the idea here is the legislative intent is that tax credit is going to create an opportunity to put unemployed people on the payroll and people who otherwise could not work because of the lack of transportation. And if it works, then this commissioner, through the budget process, will come forward to us and say, you know, this is working in this limited part of the state or in these limited businesses. We want to roll this out all across Georgia. Same way with the 22 counties. We needed to start somewhere, so we said, how can we identify a reasonable number of dollar cost? And that's where we come up with those 22 counties. So let's test it. Let's see if it works. If it has the benefits we think that it will, let's roll it out all across Georgia.
Thank you for this bill.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Gardner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And to our chairman, as I told you the other day, I think this is an incredibly visionary plan. If we were only looking at how we could help end poverty in Georgia, I think it's a step in the right direction. I do have some concerns about following the money. You know, when we worked on ATL, counties were very clear that the money that they raised through T-SPLOS would stay in that county. So as we look at other sources of revenue, I mean, is the revenue other sources of revenue? I mean, if the jobs, well, that wouldn't apply, but I mean, I guess we're talking about the rideshare folks. I mean, whatever is collected in the ATL area, does it stay there? How is that going to work?
Yeah, that's a good question. A couple of things to respond to that. First of all, the money collected from the counties through sales tax would stay in those counties. Right. Okay. So that would remain there, and they would have to outline before they went to a ballot exactly how that money was going to be spent. The money collected as a tax from the rideshare fee would not we would not be able to determine exactly where it came, nor would I want to say that it had to be spent just in a certain place. We want this to be based on where those dollars can be best served to get the greatest need. You know, we spent $100 million last year on one project in the ATL area, which the rest of the state didn't get any of those dollars. But it has the greatest need. We're not going to be able to build capital projects with $30 to $60 million when we think about rail, the traditional transit. But $30 to $60 million can remove a whole lot of barriers for a whole lot of people in our state. When they're working, that income's coming back in the form of income tax. That's going to generate more money into our general fund to do more things all across Georgia. So no, there's not a mechanism to identify that this particular tax came from this particular ride and it has to go to this particular county or this particular city. And I understand that thought process and why some people may say that, but I would say that we have to be careful not to be short-sighted in that thinking, because this department's going to be able to help lift all of Georgia up together, and I think that's what's important. We're one Georgia, we all succeed or we all fail together, and this department has the ability to bring all of that under one umbrella. And the ATL is going to have a specific focus. It has their board, it'll have staff dedicated to that like it does now. They have different needs, but outside of that, we want these other folks to be able to be pulled up.
So if the counties or municipalities in the ATL region wanted to raise additional funds through the rideshare folks, they would have to come up with their own way of taxing them.
Yeah, this does not have any effect on, like today, City of Atlanta has, medallions for taxis and other this doesn't affect any of that revenue at all. All we're talking about is the state's portion of sales tax that would be collected. That's the only thing we're replacing. So the other fees that are collected from cities would remain in those cities. This is just the state sales tax.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's an ingenious plan and well thought out.
Well, it's because of folks like you that's been helping us the last 2
I am
years.
worried about the pushback we're going to get around the Uber and Lyft in the metro area.
Looking forward to you helping us move that to solve Georgia's problems.
A lot of luck.
Yeah. It takes visionary leadership sometimes, Madam Representative, and we look forward to utilizing some of yours.
Pat, I think you walked into that one. Chair had a couple of questions.
Myself.
Okay. Chair had a couple of questions,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman. Is there a fiscal note pending on a bill like this, and is there one being considered?
The answer is yes. We've requested a fiscal note. I'm not sure that one's required because the intent here is that we're going to be revenue neutral.
Right.
But when you ask the departments to put it together, we'll see what it comes back. But yes, we have requested one.
And second question, the feedback from ACCG and GMA has been what exactly?
It's been positive, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Third question and last one. If a person wants to travel between mobility zones, is there a thought as to how that would work? Or we're just basically talking about various transit routes that would work between the two zones?
Well, there's nothing that would prohibit anyone from traveling between zones. The zones are pretty large.
The zones would just be about governance. It wouldn't be about routes per se, correct?
Well, for the most part, the answer to that's yes. Now, but let me say this. We could incentivize, or a region may decide they're going to provide regional transit services with their dollars. Those counties come together and do that through the region, through the regional commission, through the regional mobility zone. In that case, it would be provided for the whole region. But one of the things we put in the legislation is, and going back to your question about non-emergency medical transports, we wanted to make it clear that the commissioner had the power to promulgate whatever rules were necessary to abide by the federal guidelines, so that the non-emergency medical transports currently bid out in 5 zones. This is more zones, but there's nothing in here that requires that he bid it in these mobility zones. So he can still do the 5 zones, and I've had those conversations with the non-emergency medical transport folks because we want to make sure that we protect those federal dollars, and he can do whatever he needs to do to make that happen. But in doing that, we don't have to give up the streamlining the bureaucracy and the creation of innovation. So yes, there's nothing in this that would prohibit any of that from happening.
And we have one more question from Chairwoman Taylor. There we go.
Thank you. It made me think of exactly that. If we wanted to have a bus system, if that's what it's going to be, go from Thomasville to Valdosta. They could work it out intergovernmentally to make sure that it goes, if that is something that's needed. It's 2 different regions, so it could be worked out if that's what was needed.
Yeah, that's right. And the idea here is you've got boots on the ground with the mobility managers. You've not just got a lot of folks sitting in Atlanta trying to decide what's good for people in southwest Georgia or southeast Georgia. There's actually that mobility manager, that staff's actually in that region working every day. So they can get a feel for the needs by working with folks like you and the counties and cities and others. So yes, and that's the beauty of this is an opportunity and a platform to think outside the box. And it's not just bus or it's not just transit, but it's also how can we partner with the private sector, because you've already heard today the innovation that's out there, and this is not stopping. We're increasing at a fast pace. Representative Todd Jones talks a lot about air taxis, and that sounds like something that's going to be 50 years from now. But the reality is that's coming very, very quickly. So this agency would be the point on bringing that technology to the state in a way that it's regulated just enough to protect public safety, but not enough to stifle the innovation. And we do not want to stop these companies from being able to be innovative and being entrepreneurial. So,
we got one more question. Representative Holly.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say, I'm very interested in reading more about it. But I'd just like to commend you on it. We've often talked and certainly expressed the fact that it's a bipartisan measure for a lot of things that move through this committee. But I like the fact that at least it seems that not only you're encouraging the cooperation, but you're really, we're being able to respect people that they're different socioeconomic classes and really kind of bring them in, especially as we, be able to recognize that people who are without mobility means oftentimes are kept outside of ability to generate any type of productivity in the commerce area. But I just like to say thank you for that.
And I know it's late, but I'm going to tell just one quick story that goes to your point. We were in one of our commission meetings. We had Albany, an Albany staffing service was there, and they told us about this story about a man that needed a job. They found him a job. They told him, be here in the morning at whatever time to take your drug test, fill out your paperwork, and we'll get you started. He didn't show up. So they called him. He said, I'm sorry, I couldn't get there. I'll be there at 2 o'clock. He calls back and says, look, I'm just going to be honest with you. All my friends have abandoned me today. I cannot find a ride to get to you. You might as well be on the other side of the world because you're 10 miles from me and I don't have transportation. He said, but the job is 1.5 miles away. And he said, I'm going to walk to work every day. So the staffing guy said, I drove out to the guy's house and picked him up, brought him to the office, did the drug test, did the paperwork. The guy's been there, I think they said 2 years, walking to work every day. Now, that's a barrier that if removed, and it's pretty simple to remove that barrier, that we're not talking about a whole lot of money to remove that simple barrier, but what it requires is setting aside the bureaucracy and the bureaucratic mindset that overtakes government so often. That's one of the most frustrating. I spent many of my years as running county government, and I was the guy when they called, and I said, why has this not already been done and resolved? But one of the most frustrating things about me in my role is the bureaucracy that stifles the ability to be innovative and creative. And that's why that guy still didn't have a job until some staffing agency said, you know what, if you want to work, by gosh, I'm going to get you to work. And they had great ideas. That staffing agency talked to us about ideas they had that we could implement as a state that would remove those barriers for a lot of people in their area. So we need to be listening to those kind of folks who are out there on the ground every day. And that's what this legislation's about. And that's why I love the folks who work for government, don't get me wrong, but I get frustrated when bureaucracy stands in the way with positive change. And Georgians deserve better than that. So thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Chairman, did you want to take public comment? I mean, given the hour, and I presume we're going to have another meeting on this for sure.
Is there anyone here that came to speak for the bill? As long as they've been sitting here, I just would hate to.
No, we don't have a list of anyone to speak for it or against it either way.
Well, if there's nobody here to speak against it, or for it, we're gonna work, again, continue to work with Lead Council on some minor tweaks and changes. I encourage all of you to please read the information you have, read the bill, come to me with any thoughts or suggestions. We want to work with you to get this right. This is the 10th iteration of the bill. So this is the 10th bill that we've changed and worked through. Appreciate Lead Council for all their work. So,
and I would encourage the members of the committee to read this legislation, read it over the weekend, because I imagine that we'll be meeting early part of next week. Yeah. Will we not, Mr. Chairman, to get this moving? Thursday's crossover day. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
One last question.
Is there handouts in the file? The PowerPoint may not be in there, but I think there is a handout, but we'll have the office email you the handout and the PowerPoint.
Great.
I think
All right.
we're adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned.